Great. All right, going live. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode in our ongoing series called the Chandler Pride Project. My name is Jude. I use they, them pronouns, and I am Chandler Pride's creative director. Joining me today is Dr. Madelaine Adelman, and we're going to be talking about lots of different activism and organizations that she is involved in the Phoenix area. I'll let you introduce yourself as well. Take it away.
Sure. I'm so glad to be here, Jude. Thank you. And thank you to Chandler Pride. And my pronouns are she, her, hers. And I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate you coming on to talk with me. So tell me a little bit more about, for those of you that are unaware, Dr. Adelman actually is one of the founders of GLSEN Phoenix. And I really want to hear your thoughts about, or like that experience, what it was like founding the Phoenix chapter, what GLSEN does. I know you have some exciting events coming up. So yeah, tell me about GLSEN.
Sure. Something I love talking about and I can talk about forever. So I'll try to keep my remarks brief because I know we only have a certain amount of time this evening today together. I tell the story about how we put GLSEN Phoenix together in all different kinds of ways. But one way that I like framing it is that someone asked. And I know that people like to get involved in all different kinds of justice issues or social change efforts. And often the way that you get involved or become more engaged is because someone asked. They invite you to a meeting, or they say, hey, there's this really cool event going on. And what happened for me is that I received a letter and I was asked by the Mesa Public School District to present a workshop on what they termed at the time, this was back in 2001, I believe, they wanted a workshop for their school counselors on heterosexism and homophobia. And my background was in gender violence and fighting gender violence. And I had done some work on sexual harassment after the Clarence Thomas hearings when I was a graduate student. So I had a background in different kinds of gender violence and violence against women. And I was just so pleased to be asked by a local entity. I was relatively new to the area. I'd gotten to ASU in 1997, so I was still figuring out where things were even. And I asked some people to work with me on it, including a recent graduate of ASU, a current staff member of ASU who worked for the Intergroup Relations Center. So Matthew and Thomas both helped out in designing the workshop, and we found and used GLSEN materials to help us put it together. And we had so much fun doing this. It sounds strange to have fun, talking about, hostile climates in K-12 schools, but we really just felt really proactive in what we were doing. And it was also, I want to say, at that time period, 20 years ago, cutting edge. No one was talking about anti-LGBTQ harassment or climates in K-12 schools. Almost no one, and certainly not no one in the area. So I just felt really good about doing something a little bit different, about contributing, about getting involved, about getting to know the local area. And eventually found out that there was a teacher, a local school teacher who was interested in starting a chapter. And so the two of us got together and said, hey, I felt like we were putting on a musical theater show. Like, let's just put on a show. Okay, we'll do this. We spent about a year talking with all different kinds of organizations. We met monthly with students, with teachers, with other LGBTQ activists, with people who are doing anti-bias work, you name it, just to see if there was a there. Was there an interest? Was there a capacity? And very quickly on, we learned that people were really interested in getting involved. So we put our accreditation proposal together, and we found out in October of 2002 that indeed we were accepted by the GLSEN national team, headquartered in New York, that we were going to be able to join this national chapter network. And so we've been on the ground here in Phoenix ever since.
It's so cool to hear about the beginnings of GLSEN Phoenix, and that there's people in the chat saying that as well. It's their first time hearing about how the Phoenix chapter got started.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, tell us a little bit more about like what Glisten does today and what things you have going on.
Sure. Well, first, I also want to say for anyone thinking about Chandler Pride, it's a bunch of people who share values, right? Who see a need. They see a difference. We all saw a difference between about how things were and how they ought to be. And we wanted to close that gap. And that is true for anyone who gets involved in whatever organization you're already in or that you want to form. I want to say starting new organizations is really hard. And sometimes it's really necessary. You might want to start out as a program or a new initiative of an existing organization instead of trying to figure out a new one, but go for it, Chandler Pride, you're doing it. And we didn't really know what we were doing. We were cobbling together our expertise, our experiences, our excitement, right? Our enthusiasm for what we knew had to change. And we just felt our way through it. And what I want to just express to anyone out there who's doing any kind of social change work, starting a new program or bringing people together in some kind of collective way, is you're going to figure it out. Talk to people. People love to help each other. We figured out how to write grants. We figured out how to talk to the media. We figured out how to host youth programs. I mean, you name it, everything that we've done, we had to figure it out, both with local support and of course with support from the national network. So our mission is really straightforward, and it's to create safe, respectful, affirming, and more recently we're adding the term liberatory, right? Liberatory spaces, places for people to learn in K-12 schools, regardless or inclusive of everyone's sexual orientation, gender identity, and gender expression. And on the one hand, it's the simplest mission, right? It's you get to be who you ought to be in school. It's where young people spend the bulk of their day. So on the one hand, it's pretty simple. Make a learning environment where everyone feels safe and affirmed and welcomed and loved. And they get to learn and meet people and have some fun, do some homework. On the other hand, it's a pretty radical idea that schools, which were not configured to be affirming places for LGBTQ people, how can we transform them into a place that can be? So it's both incredibly simple and drastically radical in the sense that you're taking something that wasn't intended to be a place for everyone. Our schools were built to be exclusionary of all different kinds of people. And we want to be part of the movement to create learning spaces in K-12 schools so that all of our children, all of our teachers, all of our educators can belong to that institution. And I'll just say personally that I loved school. Not everyone did. I happened to have really, really positive experiences in school. And so my wish is that everyone gets to love being in school as much as I did for, whatever reason is meaningful for them. You asked about what we do. We do several things. We primarily are interested in working with all the different constituent parts of a school. How do you transform an institution? You work with the entire system. So we work with teachers, and we simply give them permission, a little confidence, and some content that they never got when they were becoming teachers, whether it was 2 years ago or 20 years ago. They simply do not get the content they need to be affirming of LGBTQ youth. So we give them that confidence and content through professional development workshops. Primarily, we help them to become the supportive teachers that they already want to be. Second, we work with young people who are already leaders, who are already demanding changes in schools. And we say, what do you need? And we provide them with resources, primarily through student clubs that have become called Gender Sexuality Alliances, GSAs. They used to be called, and some of them are still called, Gay Straight Alliances. And we also want to make sure that schools and administrators, families, students, and teachers all have the policies that they need to back them up. So it's all well and good if a teacher wants to be affirming, but if there's no non-discrimination policy or not an enumerated, explicit anti-harassment policy there, or if there aren't trans inclusive policies and practices, then good intentions only get you so far. So we're interested in making sure that the policies and practices in a school are up to speed. And so we do things like, assess the policies of a school, make recommendations, and help the schools implement those protective policies.
That was a great explanation, I think, of what GLSEN does, and also in general, just like the kinds of things that we need in order to create more inclusive spaces for students, and more inclusive spaces in general. Like you touched on a lot of different aspects of, creating change, which is providing spaces, whether it's in like clubs, like GSAs for students and for people to feel included, and also trying to make sure that teachers and faculty, staff have the tools that they need to provide support. And then on top of that, if you don't change the policies, then people might not feel either safe or empowered to take that step. And so I love that GLSEN is doing all of these different aspects. And that's also something that Chandler Pride wants to kind of support, is like all of these different avenues for creating more inclusive spaces for LGBT people and making people feel safe, making them feel welcomed. I think that one of the reasons why I'm doing this work is, as I say a lot often with Chandler Pride and in general, is just because I want to make sure that, like, I did have good experiences in school, but I also experienced some of the drawbacks of not having these supports in place. And I would really like to make sure that future students, future kids have more resources and more support than what I did. So more information, feeling more empowered, like having teachers that feel like it's okay to talk about it in school. One of the scary things was that thankfully Governor Ducey vetoed was a bill that would bring back the so-called no promo homo law in Arizona. I remember the day that actually was repealed, because you and I were having a dinner at Arizona State. And you just came back from the Capitol and told me, that we had won that fight, at least in that legislative session. And that, you'd been working on this for decades. So I just wanted to celebrate that aspect as well, that you had a hand in repealing that awful law. And I hope that, people watching this and just Arizonans in general will try to speak up to prevent that from ever coming back, because until, 2019, we couldn't, really safely talk about being gay, being trans, you name it, in schools. The policies were against us in that regard. So I'm really thankful for people like you that have fought for that kind of stuff as well.
I'm so glad you reminded me of that. It's so easy to forget because, you achieve something and you move on to the next goal, right? But 2 years ago, almost to the day, we had that incredible lifting sense of achievement. And it was, as the sports teams say, it was a group effort. The law was instituted in 1991, and lots of people, including more recently, a handful of legislators. I'm not going to name everyone, but there were organizations, there were legislators, there were individuals, there were lots of young people, families, people who really tried to coordinate to do the persuasive work that was important, to do the influential work, to do the messaging, to just explain to people why this was such a terrible, terrible law. And I want to remind people that this was specifically the HIV/AIDS statute, which limited people's ability to talk about. In the statute itself, it said you could not promote, and I'm using my air quotes here, the homosexual lifestyle as a positive one. That was what we kind of affectionately, ironically called the no promo homo law from 1991, promulgated at a pretty terrible time in the AIDS movement in terms of people's health. We still see a disproportionate number of young people of color in particular who are not receiving the education that they need. And so the removal of that terrible phrase from that statute was an incredible achievement. And even though it only applied to the very few minutes that the students got HIV/AIDS education, as you were saying, it was misinterpreted, too broadly applied, so that educators, people who worked in schools, had no idea. They really weren't sure if they were able to say the word gay, let alone be affirming or let their students do assignments that had to do with gay or trans issues. So it had terrible, for 2 decades, had terrible consequences. And the bill that was just vetoed actually would have made things even worse. It was more broad. It was beyond HIV/AIDS education. And don't get me started, but you can see the New York Times piece that came out that talked about Ducey's veto, and we all thank him for that. That's what a leader's supposed to do, is stand up for those who are most vulnerable, and we appreciate that. There's one point that I want to make that sometimes gets lost when we're talking about LGBTQ issues, and that is one of the interesting parts about the rainbow that we're always referring to is that people who are part of the LGBT community are also part of every single other community, be it religious, racial, ethnic, geographic, immigrant, you name it, disability. So one of the exciting things about doing this kind of work through Chandler Pride and through GLSEN Phoenix is that all of the issues that you care about, you can work on through LGBTQ activism. So if you care about racism, if you care about access and ability for everyone, if you care about fully funding our schools, if you care about environmental justice, pick an issue. It's an LGBTQ issue. And that's really, for me, a lot of what I've learned and been able to grow in our own activism locally, because you're never done. There's always more to work on because it's all interconnected.
That's a great point, and I'm glad that you returned us to intersectionality and brought that up, because it's always something that we should be talking about, is how just like the intersection of these different identities are probably one of the most important things to be always addressing in policy when you're making recommendations, when you're trying to create change. So I really appreciate that, because you're absolutely right. They're always interconnected, and there's always work that we can continue to do. We got a question in the chat, actually.
Sure.
Someone wants to know how you can volunteer for GLSEN.
Did I pay that person to put that question in there? No, I did not. So thank you for asking. Please just simply go to glissenphoenix.org, GLSEN, and then Phoenix all spelled out. It's all one word. I think that Jude might be putting that into the chat as well. So glissenphoenix.org. Go to our website. You can also just send an email to info, like information, info, INFO, at glissenphoenix.org. And we will respond to you ASAP. And we have opportunities for volunteering in all different kinds of ways, both front of stage, if you will, in terms of our programs that I mentioned, but also in terms of what we call operations. So like the more backstage. Join me in helping to fundraise for the organization. I've served in every single position there is in the organization. And so what I'm working on now is ensuring that there are resources for the organization so it can continue doing its work and grow its footprint. Right now, we serve Maricopa County, basically greater Phoenix area, but we know that there's need across the county in ways that we can't meet right now because of our, the capacity that we have. So the more people who volunteer, the more work that we can do. So there's development work to be done. There's media work. There is all different kinds of operational work behind the scenes. We can have volunteers who help us recruit more volunteers. So one way to learn about our organization, in addition to visiting our website, which we are happy to say was recently redesigned by Rebecca Semik, S-E-M-I-K. You can look Rebecca up if you want to get your website done. We have a special event coming up on May 14th called Sparkle, Glitter, Glisten. So if you just Google, and I think Jude also might be putting that into the chat, Sparkle, Glitter, Glisten, because glisten is like, sparkling. So Sparkle Glitter Glisten coming up on May 14th is our annual celebration of our volunteers, of our community. We're going to have some special guests. We're going to have a silent special auction. We're selling raffle tickets for a fabulous vacation in Costa Rica. We're only selling 120 of those tickets. We are now under 90 available, so check that out. But the evening is really a celebration of the work that we've already done and the work that we aspire to do moving forward. And this is I believe, our 6th annual Sparkle Glitter Glisten. We'll be giving out awards for the GSA of the year, for our GSA sponsor of the year. We have Ally Awards, and we also have a Legacy Award. So stay tuned for some special guests and some amazing opportunities to get involved there too.
To echo someone in the chat, Sparkle Glitter Glisten is always super fun. It's a great event. Definitely consider attending if you can.
I should say it's virtual. We are being COVID safe, and this year we moved it and are keeping it virtual so that we can all be together soon enough.
Yeah, I think that's a good choice to make sure that everyone's staying safe. But yeah, even though it's virtual, I would still say it's probably going to be equally as fun, and I would definitely recommend it. And also, as someone who has volunteered with Glisten before, definitely consider doing that if you can as well. It's a fantastic organization. So let's see. In our last few minutes, one of the things that Chandler Pride is trying to focus on is we're kind of in this critical moment where we could potentially push the Chandler City Council to adopt a non-discrimination ordinance. And I'm kind of curious of like what your thoughts are on that. Any advice for any activists watching as well, and just really just stress what is the significance of trying to pass this kind of policy?
Mm-hmm. So policy matters, right? Policy it's kind of like your budget. It is an expression of your values. So if you are particular about where you spend your money, I'm only going to spend my money in places that have good hiring practices, that pay their employees well, etc. So if you make informed choices about how you spend your money, you also want to make informed choices about where you want to live. Do they have good policies? Do they have leaders, elected officials in that town that you can believe in and that feel like they're there for you as a constituent? Are they building a place where you would want to invite your friends to hang out, right? And walk down the sidewalk together with you? Are they building a city or a town where you'd like to open a business and feel confident that anyone who wants to come and spend money in your business will feel welcome in that town? So the policies that we have really do matter because they tell us what we believe in, who we think of as important in our town are codified in our policies. So Chandler has some choices to make, and I hope that they make some good choices sooner rather than later. Although I do want to say that it can be a process. For all that it may seem that Scottsdale and Mesa quickly took the vote and passed their ordinances, it was years in the making, years. And what that took was persistence and relationship building, which is about trust, right? So anyone who is listening or sees this another time and wants to get involved in creating the kind of Chandler that they want to be part of, I highly recommend that you start getting to know people and raising questions and asking people, hey, do you know what a non-discrimination policy is or ordinance is? Do you know why it matters? Do you know what kind of ordinances we have? Do you know what kind of populations are already protected through those policies? It doesn't mean that bad things aren't going to happen. It means that when they do, we can look back and say, hey, that's against our policy, and then we can do something about it. If you don't have a protective policy and the bad things happen, well, That's just the way things are. So I highly recommend that people start talking about the issue with people they already know, but also asking questions about, like, if you go to a restaurant or you go to a hardware store or you are in the community college or you're in Chandler Unified School District or another school in the area, ask them what their policies are. What are your workplace anti-discrimination policies? Are they inclusive of gender identity and gender expression? Are they inclusive of sexual orientation among all the other kind of classes or categories of identities that are typically targeted? Great. Your workplace discrimination policy is already where it should be. Don't you think we deserve to have a city that has the same kind of non-discrimination policy? So you can build that way. And if your workplace or the places where you do business and spend your money, where you're spending your values, if they don't have those kind of inclusive policies, you can ask them, hey, what would it take to have a conversation about that, right? Like, who do I have to talk to? Let's have a conversation about that. Building those steps, building the support means that then you can turn to them and say, will you come with me to the city council meeting and express why you thought it was important to change your workplace policy? It really is about turning the tide in that kind of incremental way. It's not going to happen overnight, but I do think that Chandler wants to be competitive and thought of positively, and having an inclusive non-discrimination ordinance is one way to help do that.
I think that was a fantastic summary of why it's important to have a non-discrimination ordinance, and to be quite honest with you, I want your permission to use that
Oh, sure.
as we're advocating for it, because I think that you summed it up perfectly, like how, like, the language that we would need in order to try to convince people that this is of the utmost importance. I want to thank you again for coming on, for sharing your wisdom of activism with me and with our audience. And if there's any last words that you have before we end the chat, feel free.
Yeah, I would just say sometimes it feels a little overwhelming. There's so much to do in the world. There's so much you want to change, that just doing something feels really good. It feels really good. So maybe do something small every week or even every day. Make a phone call. Figure out who you're supposed to call. Just knowing who your representatives are, knowing who your neighbors are. I can't tell you how important that is. So when you start having those really informal kind of conversations, you create relationships, and you build trust, and then you can ask each other for help. And that is, for me, kind of the definition of democracy, right? With a small d. That's why we're here together. Otherwise, we're all just going to fend for ourselves, and that's not going to work.
That's
I
fantastic
appreciate you,
advice.
Jude, and what everything that Chandler Pride is doing. I'm really excited to be part of it and look forward to what's next.
Thank you so much, Dr. Adelman. You're a fantastic person to talk to. I always enjoy our conversations, and today especially, I think that you've given us some fantastic advice. I'm also so glad that we were able to highlight GLSEN, and definitely, if you haven't taken a look at the links that I put in the chat, please check out Sparkle Glitter GLSEN, volunteer with GLSEN. There are tons of opportunities and links to the things that we've discussed in the chat below. But otherwise, I hope you all have a lovely day. Thank you for tuning in. And thank you so much, Dr. Adelman, once again for joining me.
Have a good night. Thank you.
All right.